my third, and she's not so tiny anymore. She's 7 months, which is crazy. I don't know where the time has gone. And actually, this is probably the happiest and healthiest I've ever been as a mum. And, you know, comparing this to my sort of last two pregnancies and that postpartum, I had postnatal depression with my second, and my first one was very poorly, and so that was a very stressful period. So this, I'm really enjoying her. Like I love, I just love everything about her little faces, and yeah. So pretty standard, bold standard. For those of you that don't know me, so I was born with a cleft lip. So I've been in and out of hospitals all of my life, having lots of surgeries and lots of therapies and stuff. And being in hospital was probably one of the places I felt most comfortable, because all of the healthcare staff were absolutely wonderful. And my doctors were incredibly empowering and wonderful, and constantly told me how beautiful I was and how intelligent I was. You know, because when you're growing up, looking different is really hard. And, you know, kids are mean. And so when I was in hospital and attending school in hospital, I just thought, you know what, I want to be like these people and make that difference in someone else's life. So I was incredibly fortunate to have parents that were supportive, and also to have teachers that were supportive. I owe my career to them, particularly my teachers, who have always pushed me. So I got into, I worked, you know, did the bog standard GCSEs, didn't do so well at A-level. I had a really hard time at college, so then I didn't get in the first time. I reapplied and then managed to get an unconditional offer for Barts in London, which is where I trained. That was my first ever job. And then when I was at medical school, I used to work for a GP practice as a receptionist and also as a note summarizer. So when people were transforming their notes from sort of paper-based notes to electrical notes, I was updating all of the patient records, which was really great. You know, helped me in medical school. What makes a great doctor is someone that's willing to accept that they don't know everything, and that they are fallible, and that they will make mistakes, which is not something you'll hear very often. People will talk about skills, and I think skills can be learned, but actually a very, very fundamental part of it is willing to learn and grow from those around you. And in order to do that, you need to have some humility and accept that you are not always going to be the best person that knows everything. And when you have that sort of mindset, it allows for growth to happen, and that you appreciate everyone else's expertise. And, you know, my career has definitely been shaped by people that weren't doctors, and I've learned an incredible amount from them. And in terms of, you know, skills, I mean, you definitely need core skills. Like, you need to be able to listen, and listen to actually hear and not reply, which is something that we all do. You know, we listen so that we think the other person needs to hear a response from us, but actually what they need is for us to hear and understand what they're saying. And what skills didn't I receive in training? Oh God, well, that, you know, lots actually. Lots of skills. You know, we're taught communication, but we're not taught things like empathy or time management or prioritization or how to cope with things. So there are lots of things that I've gained in my training, which actually has probably been shaped by parents, you know, things to say, things not to say. And I think in order to be a pediatrician, you just have to, I think, you have to be quite, not happy, but you have to be quite, I think, positive, because children are very astute and very good at picking out people, and they recognize things in you that as adults we don't. They're very, very pure and honest. And so I think there has to be an element of friendliness and bubbliness, and you know, being a bit silly, trying to make them comfortable, I guess. And attention to detail, actually, because as pediatricians we see a whole breadth of stuff, and it's really easy to miss things. No, actually, I think there's something, you know, there's actually very good research, if you look at sort of medical training in the UK, that does something to these incredibly bright people that start medical school at the ages of 18 and 19 in the UK. And there's something about medical training that morphs them and makes them into these sort of perfectionist seeking individuals that are really, really sort of high strung and driven, and that's not good. You know, there's lots of evidence how perfectionism is associated with lots of mental health issues and sort of self-detrimental behaviors, if that makes sense. And I think when I left medical school, I thought I was the bee's knees. And I think there's something about medical school that does that to you. You think you are the bee's knees. And so when you approach medicine, you think you know better than everyone. And then sort of real life mellows you out a bit. And it's really interesting. Like, I've been practicing now for over 10 years. And when I look back at my former newly qualified self, like, I just think, oh, there are so many things I wish I'd done differently. But that's what I mean. You have to be able to call yourself out and be like, you know what, I didn't do that to the best of my ability, or I shouldn't have said that, I should have done this. And yeah, there are lots of things that I do very, very differently to what I was taught in medical school. It's really interesting, you know, it's that typical interview question that you get for medical school, or when you apply for higher specialty training, and they say to you, what's the one thing that you don't like about yourself, or the one thing that you would change? And everyone says, oh, I'm a perfectionist, because they know that's what the people in front of you want to hear. And, you know, I'm a perfectionist, it means that like X, Y, and Z. And now when I think back, and I think that's such a horrible answer, because what you should be able to say is, I hope I was less of a perfectionist, because actually it stops me doing things, it stops me innovating, it stops me thinking outside the box, because I'm so focused on achieving 100% all the time that I actually don't see all the wonderful things I've done in that 99%. And, you know, and the fact that you simply physically can't give 100% to everything all the time, it's physically not possible. So I have quite a lot of inspirations, actually. So I think there are a few consultants that I work with at the Homerton, which is where I was working before I went on maternity leave. One of them is an acute pediatrician, and I think she's absolutely fantastic. She just has such a sort of lovely maternal, like, aura around her, and she's very nurturing. So she nurtures you as a trainee and helps you grow professionally, and also identifies pitfalls in your practice that you aren't necessarily aware of. And you know, it's really interesting, because I'm in training, so I always say, oh, when I grow up, that's who I want to be. But I'm actually quite grown up, so I guess when I'm sort of in that age bracket and been practicing for 20-30 years, that's the kind of person I want to be. And then I have another consultant who is a community pediatrician, who was my educational supervisor, and she is just fantastic. Like, you know, she is so passionate about what she does, she's so articulate, and there's no beating around the bush. What you see is what you get, and she advocates for her patients and she advocates for her trainees really, really beautifully. And I've not met very many people who are as intelligent, emotionally intelligent, that's the word I'm looking for, as she is. So I guess both of them are incredible women. And actually more recently, I've been sort of looking into healthcare management and sort of looking into CEOs and stuff. So there are a few, you know, CEOs, or the ex-CEO of Whittington Hospital. She is fantastic. I had the pleasure of speaking to her quite recently about her journey from sort of being a nurse into then healthcare management. And I guess that's where I sort of see my inspiration, because I'm not sure if being a doctor is going to be the final thing for me. I definitely am looking into sort of leadership roles, and, you know, perhaps pursuing an MBA in healthcare management and sort of getting onto that ladder. Because the thing for me is that when I was growing up and when I entered medicine, it was a very Caucasian, Eurocentric field, and it still continues to be at the very top. So there wasn't anyone like me that I could look up to. So there were no Muslim women or brown women really, and now there are there are a few brown women, but not Muslim women in any sort of healthcare leadership role, and there's definitely a handful of women that are at that CEO level. And if they are at that CEO level, they are, unfortunately, all of them are white. And I just want a little girl, 5 to 10 years from now, hopefully looking at me and being like, you know what, I could be her when I grow up. Because I didn't have that. In fact, I was told by all of my sort of teachers when I was at medical school, not teachers, trainers, to just get married, be a GP, because apparently that was the easy thing to do, which is such nonsense, to get married and have babies. And I was like, well, what about all this ambition that I have and all of this drive? What am I supposed to do? And everyone said, you either pick your career or you pick having a family. And you know what? I said, no, I'm going to do it both. And I've taken a long time doing it. I'm really happy with the career I've chosen and the path that I've chosen, and that I've got a family that I can fall back to. And I've got a really, really bright career, which I'm really incredibly proud of. I would say to them, yeah, if that's what you want, and this is, you've thought about it, you've thought about what the job demands, because, a lot of people actually go into medicine thinking they're going to be rich, which is not true. You really have to go into medicine to be essentially to be at service of others. That is what it is about. And I would say to them, enjoy your time at medical school. You have the rest of your life to be doing those audits and doing those projects that everyone thinks that they're going to do. And what I would encourage them to cultivate their relationships, because actually people need people at a very fundamental level. Human beings, we are social creatures. We need other people to be happy, and I don't mean that in a reliance way, but I just think you become, sometimes at medical school, you become so focused on sort of being a doctor that you forget that there's a whole life around of you and a whole bunch of things that you can do, like cultivate so many other skills, be a yoga teacher, learn to be a personal trainer if that's what you want to do, be a baker, pick up an art, do the things that you won't have time to do once you qualify as a doctor for the first few years, because it is hard. And I don't beat around the bush. Medicine and being a healthcare professional is a very, very challenging career, and you don't necessarily have time to do all of that stuff once you qualify. But the relationships you cultivate, the talents you nurture will always serve you. Oh, hands down my patients. Oh, hands down my patients. Honestly, yeah, I always say this, but children are hilarious. And so, I can tell some right corkers about kids that I've met in my practice. And, you can be having a really, really bad day, but you'll get that one kid who just changes it. And they're generally really, really lovely to be around. People often say, oh, but sick kids are, I could never do that. But actually sick kids, even when they're sick, they are so lovely. And, being part of that sort of very vulnerable moment in other people's lives, it's very humbling. And it's a very, very sort of natural reminder about the transitional nature of everything. That's something that's true now may not be true in 10 minutes time, and it gives you perspective on what actually is important. So it's not necessarily all the materialistic stuff, it's about those relationships, the family, the unit around you, the friends around you. So by hands down my patients, they are so funny. And yeah, they make work worth turning up to. I guess it's the same for most other doctors. It's the work pressure. It's not having the right kind of equipment, the right kind of staff, the right kind of support, being short-staffed, overworked, underpaid, that kind of stuff. I'm never underworked. I think medicine has really changed in the last 20 years, and in a decade of austerity, we are the people that at the forefront picking up the pieces. And I work in some of the poorest areas in the country. And it makes me incredibly aware of my privilege, but also incredibly aware of the disparity between people. In one day, I can meet people who are literally in the top 0.5% of the country in terms of earning potential, in terms of disposable income, and then those that are like living day to day, meal to meal, and they don't know where their next meal is going to come from or how they're going to feed their child. And for me, that is the hardest part of my job, because I have very little power to change that within the scope within which I work, apart from advocating at a national level for changes in our political system, changes in our healthcare system, fighting against privatization, fighting for equality, that kind of stuff. And I think gone are the days where doctors could be apathetic and not have a political stance, because things were so much better. But actually, in this day and age, we need to be aware of the fact that the choices we make politically impact the patients that we care for. I guess the first one would be to put people in charge of things that actually knew what they were doing, that they were qualified to do the job, that they were, I don't need to talk about our health secretary, but our health secretary is not qualified to do the job he's doing. And I'm happy to put that out there. And I think by a product of my training, everything I've learned is you put your best foot forward. And so your best foot forward has to be the best people that are right for the job, that have the right training, the right background, and the right commitment. I guess the second thing would be that I would increase funding for our healthcare. So for those of you that aren't aware, there's been a very, very systematic decrease in funding, and people say, it's overspending, it's healthcare tourism. It's actually none of that. It's, the NHS is strategically underfunded to make way for privatization, which, as a doctor, I benefit from, and I have no qualms in saying that. As a doctor, private healthcare for me means that I live great. But ethically, I'm not sure where that, how that makes me feel. So increased funding. And then third, it would have to be better support for frontline and sort of healthcare staff that aren't frontline as well. So anyone working within the NHS, because we don't have access to the support we need, whether that's psychological, whether that's physical, things like childcare support. There's so many things in there, mental health support, physical support, childcare support, access to parking. There are so many things I could do, which is probably why I'm not in charge of healthcare. I think I have a lot of internal motivation. I think being in a position where I am, I meet very real families and very real people that are hard to ignore. So it's really hard to come home and box it all away and put it back, because I see it all the time. And so my motivation, I've always been very internally motivated to do the things that I want to do. And I guess the families that I care for, the stories that they share with me, the pleas for help, because I don't know how else to say that, it all drives you. And this is, I guess, what I do on social media is part of that package, because it is a lot of my time, and a lot of my time is spent not giving advice, but navigating people to the resources they need to help them, because I know we don't all have the same 24 hours in the day. We aren't all in the same boat, particularly post-pandemic, and the NHS waiting services are absolutely crazy. And sometimes all someone needs is, yes, you know what, this is something you need to fight for. Yes, I think you are right to be worried about your child. You need to go back to your GP. Yes, I agree, there is something going on here. Someone needs to have a look at it. And that kind of reassurance and support, I guess is also the motivation I get. It is my community. I'm a very social person, and I guess an empath. I really do feed off the energies around me, and so it's also, I'm incredibly fortunate to be where I am in life, and part of that is hard work, but a lot of that is just luck and being born lucky in the right family at the right time in the right country. I could easily have been born somewhere else and not have the opportunities, and I'm not oblivious to that. And I think it's about creating equality, or at least equity, for everyone else to hopefully better their life. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
I guess the biggest impact has been that it has really, really widened that poverty gap. And, you know, I remember sitting in clinic this time last year, very heavily pregnant. And I worked in Hackney, which is, you know, it's not a very, it has two sort of ends of the poverty scale. You've got the very gentrified Hackney, and then you've got the very poor, you know, under-resourced, underfunded services in Hackney. And it was listening to sort of parent after parent after parent talking about how they rely on food banks and how they rely on hand-me-downs and community sort of sales of clothes to just survive. And there's mold growing in their council houses, and they're waiting and they're working. So these aren't people that are just sat at home doing nothing. They're really, really trying to fight against a system that isn't designed to uplift them. And I think that has become worse post-pandemic. I think a lot of people are living below the poverty line, which is, you know, in England or in the UK, which is a modern developed country. I think it's crazy. I think it's ridiculous that we have one of the sort of lower child health fundings in sort of the developed world, and morbidity is particularly high. We don't really care about maternal health. We don't really care about child health. It's so far off the agenda politically and otherwise that these things are continuing to happen. And you know, children waiting to get assessed for things like neurodiversity or sensory issues or delays. They're just waiting, and I think it has had a massive impact on childcare services, and I think that the government does have a lot to answer for, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Oh, and my biggest lesson. So as I've been very vocal about the fact that I was very, very close to burnout before the pandemic hit. And, you know, I think I burned out because I care a lot. And I'm not saying that if you don't care a lot, you don't burn out, or do you know what I'm saying? It was just, I had a really, really tough year. So 2019, 2020, I took a year out of my training to do teaching, which is something I'm very passionate about. And that was a sort of meant to be a year of 9 to 5, a sort of an easier life. And then obviously the pandemic hit, and I just think it just really tipped me over the edge. And what that taught me is to have things in my life that look after my mental health. So whether that's regular check-ins with therapy, or you know, building up, you know, I've done a lot of CBT in the last sort of year and a half, and building up, cultivating practices within myself that harbor mental health in me, and recognizing when I'm close to mental health. Saying no has been the biggest one. I'm very, very bad at saying no, and so now I'm like, no, I'm really sorry, I can't do this, or no, this I just swamped, and asking for help. Because as medics, you know, we're taught that we can do everything and that we just need to plow on with it because other people are. And there's a real culture in the NHS about resilience and how you are meant to be resilient whatever comes at you. But actually, if you're constantly being hit by a bat, at some point you need to say, no, stop hitting me, you know, instead of being like to the person being hit, actually, you just need to be more resilient, you know, get some padding, no, stop hitting me.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to be a real culture change. So I really don't use that word resilience anymore, because you don't need to be resilient. You just need to work in places that are nice and look after you and care for you. I want to say I'm not that talented, but actually I am trained in Indian head massage. So I give a pretty good head massage. So I have a wonderful masseuse who, that sounds really weird, but actually I developed a sports injury many years ago and was recommended a lady who works in Tower Hamlets, Amina, and she runs her therapy clinic for the community around her. And then subsequently she taught me, she was teaching, so she teaches students to become masseuses, and she did an Indian head massage course, and I did pretty well on it. So I give a really decent, and I have a certificate and everything, you know, that says I'm trained in Indian head massage. So I give a very good head massage. And my other hidden talent is I'm really good at animal noises. So my kids will tell you that I'm an excellent monkey noise maker and gorilla. I can do an excellent monkey and a gorilla, which I'm not going to do on your podcast, by the way, just before you ask. But I do a really good monkey. Yeah, I do actually. So as you know, I am of the Muslim faith. So I observe prayers 5 times a day, and so at least 2 of those prayers will be at work, which means I take 5 minutes to myself. And so it doesn't have to be prayer; it can be, meditation or quiet or mindfulness. So these are all essentially the same thing. But for me, when I take those 5 to 10 minutes of just mindfulness practice when I'm praying, it just brings me, I really earth myself. I don't know how else to say it. It keeps me very, very grounded. And on particularly those days where I've had a really tough time, I've either lost a patient or delivered some really bad news, or it's just been one of those days where I don't know where my head is. I find it really grounding. And the other things I do is that I eat well, which doesn't mean that I eat healthy stuff. It just means I eat stuff that cultivates happiness in me. So I make sure I get the right kinds of food in me to keep me going. Because actually in the past, I used to probably rely on a lot of chocolates and donuts and all of that kind of stuff. But, once that sugar hit wears off, you feel really rubbish. And so now I have those in moderation, but with a lot of other plant-based foods that keep me really, I guess, energized. And gut health is something I've been exploring in the last sort of year or two, and it has made a really positive impact in my life. And so, yeah, those would probably be the 2 things that really keep me happy. Yeah, so I love cooking, and I bake when I have the time, but sadly a lot of the baking stuff is a lot of the sweet stuff. So we don't bake that often, but I cook everything from scratch. Interestingly, I was having a conversation about 2 weeks ago with a friend, and she was like, "Oh, what pasta sauce do you buy?" And I was like, "I've not bought pasta sauce in maybe 10 years. I just don't buy it. I make my own pasta sauce. I have done forever." And so for me, it's really going back to the basics, and I teach my kids that as well, that food should be eaten whole. And I think there is a real, I love cooking with my kids. We make salad together every day. They are learning to make roti, which is, the chapati flatbread you might get. So my boys are learning to make that at the moment. I cook everything from scratch, all my curries, all my sauces, essentially. And I really enjoy it. I really enjoy nurturing that in my children, because I think we become a generation that relies on fast food, that relies on processed foods and packaging, and sort of taking that away and going back to what serves us as people. I think success, for me, is being happy all round, at work, at home, and it's finding a balance between my career and my home life, and also me. And I always talk about this even on my social media. I've been me, so I've been Kiran a very long time, and I've only been a doctor a part of that time, and I've only been a wife a part of that time, and I've only been a mother a part of that time. So all of those things need to be in harmony in one another. And so for me, success is when I'm successfully harmonizing all aspects of my life. So devoting time for me, so as Kiran, and doing the things that I've always loved doing, and then devoting time for my relationship with my husband, and that comes first before my relationship with my children. I do think having a healthy relationship with your partner sets the tone for having healthier relationships with your children, and then that, because all of those things are happy, I can then focus on my career. So it's finding harmony and balance, which is really hard, but yeah, that's what success is to me. I guess, money also helps. I'm not going to sit here and say money doesn't help, but it's not the thing that, I didn't go into medicine to be rich, let's be honest. To be honest, I think they have made people less aware, because they have been I think everyone's sole focus has been survival, whether that's physically from a very real threat of dying in the pandemic, to mentally just getting through each day, balancing all of their needs, and, just survival has been the key. And it's really interesting, because if you look at the political sort of undertone, there's lots of things that have been slipped in under the radar in the last 2 years that I don't think the public are necessarily aware of. Things like private contracts, things like privatization in the NHS, sort of working rights and all of that kind of stuff. So I don't think they are more aware, actually. And, I'm not going to pretend this government lies like it's a professional job. So that's a really lovely question. So as you know, I'm on maternity leave, so days off are rare. But my husband and I, we do have an agreement that once a month we take a day together. So in last month we went to Camden and we spent the day together while the children were at school. We had the baby with us, which was fine, but that's just a day for us to do something that we might want to do. And we went to Camden, we walked around the locks, tried out all the food areas, and then we went for a really nice meal together. So on my days off, generally I either spend it with my husband on a date day and we explore London and that might or surrounding areas, or I hang out with my girlfriend, so we again spend the day together. So my next day off is with one of my really good girlfriends next Thursday, and I'm spending the day with her. I think we're going for a walk and then we're going to do a bit of shopping because she needs makeup, and that's it. Just doing regular stuff.